Bibliophiles of the internet, my name's Adriana, and today I'm here to bring you part 2 of my May wrap-up. In May, I read about 11 books total, and just thinking about putting all those reviews in one video made me super anxious, so I decided to break up my wrap-up into parts. Part 1 will be included down below, and in the cards it has reviews for The Matchmaker's List, Ruse, Dragon Pearl, When Dimple Met Rishi, and A River in Darkness, so definitely check that out. With that said, let's get into the other books I read in May, which will also conclude my Asian readathon progress. On the same day I finished A River in Darkness, I also finished The Bride Test by Helen Huang. This is an adult romance story, and because one of the characters is autistic and both characters are Vietnamese, it is also own voices. The first character is Kai, who has always believed that his autism makes him emotionless and heartless. His mother, who's deeply traditional and Vietnamese, wants him to settle down with a wife, which is not easy when he makes a point to avoid relationships. When his mom is back home visiting Vietnam, she meets Esme, a humble bathroom attendant, and proposes that Esme go to live in America for a few months, try to seduce Kai in that time, and see if she can't secure a marriage that would be advantageous for both parties. Obviously, that gets complicated when both Kai and Esme start feeling more than they expect. This was one of my most anticipated books of 2019, and honestly, I was left feeling a bit conflicted. First of all, there was amazing autism representation once again in this book, and the story explores touch aversion, missed social cues, and discovering what genuine emotional expression feels like in a romantic context. There was also really strong parallels between Kai and Esme, both feeling like they are not worthy of love and that they are less, Kai because of his autism and Esme because of her status as an immigrant. As you would expect, there is great chemistry between the characters, and the story depicts healthy, consensual sex. But then I was thrown because there were some strange moments of possessiveness, and sometimes sex was used in lieu of addressing difficult topics. That is somewhat addressed in the text, but it's still present. The bigger problem for me was that Esme doesn't just leave behind her life in Vietnam, but her child. A child who is taken care of, but who she doesn't really think about as much as you would expect. It's very easy for her to put her daughter aside to focus on seducing someone who's essentially a stranger, and then she doesn't tell Kai that she has a daughter in the first place until almost the end of the book. And on top of that, I just don't feel like this story does the topic of mail order brides justice, and I don't think it addresses the realities of immigration and seeking citizenship in accurate ways. There were definitely some factors of convenience at play in the story, which made the conclusion feel a little bit rushed and underdeveloped for my taste. So for every good aspect, there was a less than good aspect, and while I would still recommend this book, I don't think it was quite on par with the Kiss Quotient, which is why I gave it 3 stars. After that, I read the first volume of Our Dreams at Dusk by Kamatani Yuki. This is an own voices queer slice-of-life manga written by a mangaka who is queer and non-binary, which is first of all virtually unheard of, and which is also awesome as fuck. This is a heart-wrenching story about a high school boy named Tazuku who is gay, but he hasn't told anyone yet. And right before school lets out for the summer, his classmates find something damning on his phone which makes him feel extremely helpless. In fact, he's considering ending his life, but just then he sees a mysterious woman who leads him to a drop-in center for queer folks who are facing the same issues. Tazuku starts spending time with them and volunteering with them for the summer, which is helping him to accept himself. Trigger warnings for bullying and harassment, homophobia, homophobic slurs, and suicidal thoughts. This is a beautifully conceived and executed manga that is so powerful in exploring the simultaneous anxiety and elation that comes with accepting your queer existence. It's got that summer haziness to it, and I think it's authentic in exploring the hardships that queer Japanese youth face. And I think the story poses questions that every young queer person has thought about, like why am I the one who has to hide myself? Why is no one else going through what I'm going through? Is it so wrong to desire my own happiness? All these questions are pressing in on Tazuku, and it's almost cathartic to see him expressing his queerness out loud and finding a place where he belongs within this group. This manga is beautiful, hard-hitting, and emotional, and I will absolutely be continuing on with the series. I gave this first volume 4.5 stars. Then I picked up Descendant of the Crane by Joan He. This is an own voices Chinese-inspired fantasy story about Princess Hasina, whose father, the king, has suddenly died under very mysterious circumstances. She is convinced he was murdered, and in order to bring him justice, she engages in treason by going to a soothsayer to see what she has to do to find the culprit. By using this illicit information, Hasina learns that she will have to turn to Akira, who is both an excellent investigator and a thief who's currently convicted for his crimes. Now Hasina has to ask herself how many rules is she willing to break to discover the truth and ensure that her country will not break in the process. This story surprised me because I expected all the twists and turns of a mystery with fantasy elements, but really this story explores the intersections between perception, truth, and grief. I think sometimes in fantasy stories we can become desensitized to death and we just accept it as part of the plot, but this story is really about Hesina working her way through grief and seeking justice as a way to honor and understand her loss. You truly come to understand the dynamic she had with her father, who was loving and imperfect, and you see how each twist in this mystery both fundamentally alters and deepens the perceptions Hesina had of her father in life. And it was fascinating to see the burdens of becoming a young queen of an unstable kingdom, a kingdom on the brink of war and threatening to tear itself apart because of fear and lies. You really feel the weight of that political moment, and you see all the ways Hesina is tricked and taken advantage of simply because she lacks the experience. And it's satisfying to see her learn along the way and come to fully embrace the power of her choices. This was a really interesting, emotionally evocative fantasy story that I would definitely recommend. I gave it 4.5 stars. After that, from my library, I listened to You Go First by Erin Entrada Kelly, read by Amy Lynn Abelera. This is a contemporary middle grade story about Charlotte and Ben, who have never met and live hundreds of miles apart, but they connect daily over a Scrabble game on the internet. They're both extremely intelligent and gifted, but they don't have many friends, and they also happen to be going through some difficult times with their families. Charlotte's father has recently had a heart attack, and Ben's parents have just told him that they're getting a divorce. So it's about how these two connect and how they make sense of these situations. I do want to mention that the author is Filipino, but there is no explicit representation on the page. I think this story had so much promise, but ultimately there were a lot of loose threads that never really seemed to connect. My biggest issue was that this story is positioned as an exploration of this online friendship that helps these characters navigate their real-life issues, but Charlotte and Ben don't actually communicate for most of the book. They text once, they call each other a couple of times, but they don't actually confide what they're going through, and it doesn't seem like they progressed their friendship past making words on the internet. They really don't have any meaningful interactions. It just felt like these were two completely separate stories that could have existed without the gimmick of online friendship. And both characters also struggle to connect with other folks. They're both being harassed or targeted by their classmates for being weird, and that's also something that was never really addressed. There was a really strong use of voice, and I think Ben and Charlotte were characterized well in their nerdiness, but there was no satisfaction to be had from their respective emotional arcs. So ultimately, I gave this story 3 stars. Next, I briefly want to talk about my poetry collection for May, which was When I Grow Up, I Want to Be a List of Further Possibilities by Chen Chen. Chen Chen is a queer Chinese-American immigrant, and this poetry collection explores his mother's hospitalization, his strained relationship with his parents, queerness, queer desire and identity, and also the necessity of loss. What I love about this poet is that he has this exuberant, humorous personality that comes through in each and every piece. And he crafts poetry in a way that's accessible, almost conversational, and in a way that completely disregards all pretense. I think our conception of poetry is that it has to be lofty and academically distant. In order for it to be real poetry, the speaker has to obfuscate their every point. But Chen Chen just says exactly what he means, thereby inviting the reader into this incredibly intimate space. And he also plays a lot with word shapes and word sounds, and by creating these seemingly random textual associations, he's able to let the poems unfold in really interesting directions. This is a poetry collection where a poem about the speaker jerking off to their favorite Japanese porn star in order to be subversive can exist next to a poem about displacement and experiences of diaspora as an immigrant, and I really appreciate that range of content. I enjoyed this collection and I gave it 4 stars. As if that wasn't enough, I was able to squeeze in one last book, my arc of Tell Me How You Really Feel by Amina May Safi. This is an Own Voices queer sapphic book about a Muslim American teenager named Sana and her crush/sworn enemy Rachel, who is Mexican and Jewish. These two got off on the wrong foot a few years back when Sana tried sincerely asking Rachel out, but Rachel took it as the popular cheerleader pranking the weird film geek and has resented Sana ever since. Now it's senior year and Sana has just made things worse for herself by accidentally causing some minor damage to Rachel's expensive school-issued filming equipment, and now she's been cast as the lead role in Rachel's final assignment as punishment. Romance and chemistry ensues. This is like the perfect fun summer romance, not because it takes place during the summertime, but just because it's romantic and swoon-worthy in all the right ways. Within seconds of the opening page, we get that trademark, oh no, the romantic heroes have fallen down and now one is pinned underneath the other in a way that makes them feel things moment, which says everything you need to know about the energy of this book. Like any good romance, the story has dynamic characters who complement each other and drive each other's character development in fulfilling ways. We have Rachel, who's insecure as a scholarship student and who has this complex against beautiful, mysterious women ever since her mother walked out. She's very guarded and rough around the edges, which means it's taking longer for her to work through those issues. Sana, on the other hand, is very precise and deliberate about everything she does. She's captain of the cheerleading squad and she got into Princeton on early application, but she struggles with maintaining this perfect image. Especially as a South Asian American teenager, I think she feels pressure to fulfill her family's hopes and dreams and to validate their sacrifices in a sense. There's also a lot of incredible feminist overtones in this book. As marginalized women, both Rachel and Sana face deep-seated insecurities, these ideas of who they should be and what they should be doing with their lives, and they help each other challenge those beliefs. It's a delightful romantic comedy full of mishaps and missteps, and I definitely recommend it. I gave this one 4 stars. So those are the rest of the books I read for the month of May. If you've read any of them yourself, or if you would like to read them in the future, please feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. But that's everything I had for this May wrap-up today. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope that you enjoyed it, and I'll catch you on the flip side of the page. Bye!